Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'm thrilled to welcome three guests, wonderful guests that you'll get to meet in a moment, for today's topic, which is funding through a data lens. This topic is around how is it that we pursue funding and use data as a tool for those efforts. I'm going to start by having the panel here introduce themselves. And since we have one lady, I have to start with you, Frankie. Please introduce yourself and tell us your perspective on this topic.
Well, thank you. My name is Frankie Jackson, and I have served as a Chief Technology Officer in my career for over 25 years. I made a career transition in 2019 and started working at the state and national level. And a career highlight has been my work with the Coalition for Cybersecurity and Education. So I've been involved with that project. I've done a lot of work. Kind of my pet passion, you might say, is in analysis of value of technology investments. In my 25 years in serving in school districts from the size of, say, 25,000 to 120,000, and working through 6 bonds, the last bond being $1.2 billion, I'm very familiar with being able to show that value of investment. I'm currently writing the content for a course with COSN, which is the Consortium of School Networking. And I'm working with experts in the field that serve in our EdTech leadership community to try to get our arms around and define exactly what value of investment, return on investment, total cost of ownership really means in this education technology leadership space as we move into even more critical funding cuts and moving towards the future and defining what the education technology landscape looks like in the future. So I'm excited to be here and excited to learn from each of you. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks so much, Frankie, and welcome. Glad to have you here. Next, I guess we'll go with you, Carlos.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carlos, and I was actually hired as a web designer back in 2003. Been with the school district for 22 years now, and I'm now in charge of technology, public safety, PEMS, child nutrition, and the wellness department. And, I've served who knows how many committees, and in charge of inventory, retention records, and other duties as assigned. We're a very small school districts, and everybody's kind of wearing a lot of hats. Tornillo, we're actually approximately 30 miles east of El Paso, Texas. We're right along the border, and we serve approximately 695 students. We have been in a steady student enrollment decline for the past several years to the point where we've had to consolidate and close down our elementary school year, 2 years ago. So we still serve pre-K through 12th grade levels through 3 campuses, our intermediate school, junior high, and high school. But because due to the decline of enrollment, we've had to cut our operational budget up to 15%, for every single year. In addition to reducing our workforce through attrition with all these additional duties being delegated to everybody else. So it's been a challenge, but, we're here to continue serving our community and our students and our stakeholders.
Fantastic. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us. And last, but certainly not least, John, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick and Frankie. Carlos, great to be with you. I sit outside of Washington, D.C., where I have been since the mid-90s. I've been working on education technology policy and advocacy since then. In that capacity, I have worked for an ed tech company that no longer exists. I have worked for the Federal Communications Commission. I've worked for the National Education Association. And for the past 20 years, I've been on my own as a private contract lobbyist, representing a number of major K-12 education associations, as well as some major companies. Right now, I am the executive director and have been for the past 10 years of the National Coalition for Technology and Education and Training, And that is a group that brings together government, industry, and nonprofits to really talk about the value of ed tech. So this is a very pertinent conversation. It's also a very different conversation this year than we've ever had before. I will say that my work has traditionally been focused more on the connectivity side than anything else, because that's where the really big federal dollars have flowed from with the E-rate program. But I've also been engaged in things like privacy and just simply getting devices and professional development out there on technology in a way that makes sense. And we'll talk about this more later, but it's interesting that one of the more forward-looking activities of this administration, when it's not about cutting stuff, has been about AI and how to invest in that, and how we need to make sure that our students and our educators are well prepared for this future AI economy, whatever that's going to look like. So that is something that we're trying to find common ground with them on, but it is difficult as they slash funding and take away opportunities for everybody to gain access to that world and ultimately to that economy. So it's great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to a robust conversation about the value of technology. It's something that we all take for granted, but we can't do that really in this environment any longer.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And welcome to all of you. It is crazy. These are crazy times, and it's going to take creativity and the passion of people like those on this panel to make sure that we make the most of it. Let's dive right in, and let's start by talking a little bit about technology as an investment. We often hear the term return on investment, and it is very often used strictly in financial terms. But I think that there are other data points that can be used here, and we want to talk about technology that truly improves learning outcomes as a return. So we're talking about tools that are positive in their outcomes and not just there to impress stakeholders, but can actually make a difference in terms of returns. So maybe we'll start with you, Frankie, on this one. And you others, gentlemen, you're welcome to chime in as well. But Frankie, you want to kind of take this question on as a starting point?
I think, as I said when I introduced myself, one of my favorite topics is really capturing the value of investment, and have spent probably the last 5 or 6 years focused in that area, and am currently writing a course content for an 8-week course for COSIN, the Consortium of School Networking. So it's really at the forefront of everything that I'm thinking about. Just today, for example, I'm developing a module, and what I'm including in that, and these courses are designed for chief technology officers, those that might not have 25 years of experience, those that are working under the conditions like Carlos described. So they're bringing forth procurement, purchasing requests to get approved by the superintendent and the cabinet, by the board of trustees, which in a community might be made up of everything from teachers to financial accountants to housewives. So everyone on the board of trustee has an agenda. So every request that is made where we're asking for funding really has to be positioned under the context, the frame of reference of return on investment, total cost of ownership, and value of investment. And so from that lens, I think of finding very creative ways to capture that value of investment. So it's not so much about return, it is value. So here's an example, something that's near and dear, very specific to a project that I'm working on. It has to do with lowering cybersecurity insurance premiums. Working with the district starting in 2023, the district was not even able to get cybersecurity insurance. So what would that mean if you translated that into health insurance? It's like, yeah, you're in such bad shape, you can't even get insurance. It was kind of the same thing with this district. And so we, through the Coalition for Cybersecurity and Education, were called in. It's a project that I support to say, what can we do to really help this district improve? It really wasn't in the context of improving their premiums. It was, what can we do to improve their practices and processes and technologies and people in the area of cybersecurity? So we went into that district using a very specific rubric to really determine what could be done to help them improve so that they would be in a better position, not only to offer better resilience and mitigate risk, but also to manage their cybersecurity premiums. And we were able to do that within 1 year. We were able to show the value just because we had conducted a self-assessment and an evaluation of their cybersecurity practice. The district was able to get, for the first time in 2023, cybersecurity insurance at a very, very high premium. I won't even say how high that was, but it was in the multitude of 100,000s of dollars. Within the first year, because practices had been put into place, that district was able to realize a 40% decrease. And then in the second year, another 15% decrease. So what does that really mean in terms of value of investment? It is that the investment of putting the time and really almost free resources into improving their cybersecurity practice, they realized 55% decrease in their insurance premium. They were also able to take that savings and put that towards instructional needs, for human resource needs, for technology needs, and spread that across their entire district to show operation, not only funding, supplanting funding into other areas that of need, but also increasing operational resilience. That was a very long answer, but that's a tangible, very specific example of how value of investment can be used.
As an advocate and a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., my job has, really sort of twofold. One is to get more money to schools in order to be able to make the purchases they need to make sure that all kids have access to technology, to the connectivity they need, that their educators get the professional development they need, and to some extent the content. And we have used data over the years, and I had to make this case in the very early stages of technology in education, that technology itself worked academically, that there was actually a need for it, that when you saw good implementations, when you saw all of what we used to call the sort of the 4 C's in place, that you would see learning in a way you hadn't. When we set up the E-rate program, for instance, Senator Rockefeller from West Virginia, a rural state, used to talk about why we needed to connect West Virginia. It's so that they could have the one Japanese teacher in the state actually deliver learning throughout the state, because that person couldn't be all over West Virginia, which on a map doesn't look so big, but I can tell you, having driven it, it's huge. And you can't move one person around to teach Japanese all the time. But that was the kind of thing that technology was doing. I mean, we talked about virtual field trips. We talked about exposing people to things that they weren't able to get access to. So it was a different conversation back then. In the beginning, we had to say, why should we have technology in the classroom? Now it's almost a given, right? Now it's a given that there should be technology in the classroom. In fact, a lot of districts invest millions of dollars a year in this. And to Frankie's point, we're now talking about how do you save money on having technology in the classroom, right? There is now a sort of a different question that is going on. We have, and I'll say this frankly, we have Republicans in charge of both Congress and the administration, the presidency, and they are looking at this through a slightly different lens. Yes, they are aware that the NAEP scores are terrible and that achievement gaps need to be closed. And certainly any data you can bring to bear to show that applications of technology or just apps themselves will help make sure that kids can close those gaps and improve their basic literacy, their numeracy, their understanding of science, whatever is assessed on, those are certainly going to be valuable. But as you saw with the president's executive orders on AI, there's an understanding that all kids need access to technology in order to be prepared to get jobs in the future economy, that everything is moving towards AI, towards robotics, and that every teacher needs to be able to be prepared to teach this. Every administrator needs to understand that value and to prepare their teachers. And most importantly, we need to have students with the skill set that is going to be necessary to thrive there. So they are looking at the ROI from almost a slightly different perspective, which is that literally this is an investment that we're making in our kids to grow the economy and to grow businesses around the country. That's the kind of argument that we need to make, and we are making frequently now as we are defending funding that can go to technology. I mean, there's different funding streams. There's the E-rate program, which is connectivity based. There is Title IV and ESEA, which allows a certain percentage to be used on education technology. There are other titles throughout the Department of Education for K through 12 that allows spending on technology. We need to keep making the case that this technology is valuable. And now it's no longer a question of, is it valuable? It's, do we have enough of it? And is everyone going to be able to have access?
So it's largely an issue of changing the metrics for the technology, so that we're looking at it from a little different perspective.
I would say we're adding metrics, right? I would say that it's still important. The gold standard is always to show that any kind of educational intervention that you have is making a difference academically. But I also would say that we are now looking more and more towards what skills are children developing so that when they come out of high school, they're ready to go in this economy, whether they go to college or take an alternative pathway.
Great. Carlos, any thoughts on this?
Yes, definitely. In the small school district perspective, in our environment, we don't have a designated grant writer, or nor do we have the funding to outsource grant writers. And so a lot of these grant opportunities are delegated to like our internal cabinet members. And so, we always get these email notifications from the state, the legislator updates from the the House bill and Senate bills, and these things are going on daily. And our superintendent pretty much sends these reports daily to us, and they're all on Monday, unfunded mandates. So it's been a really struggle for us, a challenge to try to go out there and look for these grants and try to find all these resources that just to be not only in compliance but continue to improve on all the resources that our students need. And when it covers technology and safety, it's an array of all these different issues that we need to be aware of, and be able to come up with some kind of a long-term funding sustainability, because right now feel kind of we're just patching up with the compliance parts, but we're not really getting there. So that's our perspective when it comes to a small school district with very little funding, and so that's where we stand.
Yeah, Carlos, I'll just point out that, and Frank, you probably see this too in your district, that there's been great uncertainty around federal funding this year. We had $7 billion that were held up for 3 weeks back in July. It was only because 10 Republican senators stepped in and said this funding has to go out because we've already approved it, that it got out the door. But that uncertainty is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? So you can't trust that the dollars are coming, even though you budgeted for them. The other problem is that there's not new money anymore. You've had all of this ESSER money that came through COVID. The cliff has arrived. We are over the cliff, and there's no more money coming after that. So hopefully folks use those dollars wisely and didn't hire, for instance, salaried employees that they no longer have the money for. But the other problem is that we can't get new money on top of the existing money. Annual funding is still pegged back in 2024 dollars. Everyone is getting the same amount they got in 2024 and 2025. And chances are that will happen in 2026. So while that's great, if there are no cuts, those dollars are subject to inflation. So they don't go as far, which means that you are trying to do new things in 2026 with 2024 dollars, and you may not be able to do that because prices have gone up. So we are acutely sensitive to this. I can tell you I'm sensitive to the small rural district more than anything else, because those districts don't usually have enough population to get much formula money, but they are able to get all the E-rate money that they need. And oftentimes they'll get a discount for being rural, a deeper discount for being rural, and for having a fair amount of low income, free reduced lunch price kids. So the connectivity hopefully will be better. But as for everything else, there's just not as much money for the small rural districts.
To Carlos's point about, superintendent sends out all the grant opportunities and, working, especially in any district and in a small district, there's only a certain amount of time, you're trying to keep networks up and the kids that you have connected. One of the things, Carlos, that impressed me about your school district and the work that you're doing is that you were able to secure some of those cybersecurity pilot project funds that is a subset of follow-on of the E-rate funds that you mentioned, John. So you received one of those grants, and in Texas we have over 1,100 school districts. And there were about 55 districts that received those grants, and you were one of those. So you're in the middle of that process of what that really means to say, okay, here's some funding that I might be able to use, and I can work to write a grant and get those funds and secure those funds and do a better job at providing resources to the students of my school district. Is there anything you might want to say about that? Because I thought that was pretty impressive in the way that you handled that.
Have you gotten the
Well,
funds? Because my understanding is those dollars have not gone out at all.
Yes, Tornillo did apply for both the FCC E-Rate Cybersecurity Pilot Program and the Texas Office of the Governor State and Local Cybersecurity Program. Fortunately, we did get awarded for both. The grants were announced last year, and we just went for it. When I see these little, the announcements, I kind of read through them and see, okay, I think, we can apply for this. We have a good chance of, getting it based on our needs assessment. We actually used the rubric that Ms. Jackson referenced earlier. And, with that, we got awarded $45,000. So we were one of the 517 school districts nationwide, one out of 67 in the state of Texas that I got awarded. So, pretty proud of that accomplishment. And we're utilizing those funds specifically for projects that they've been on our list for quite some times, but because of budget constraint and resource limitations, we just haven't been able to get those completed. And with these two grants, we'll be able to move forward with these new cybersecurity initiatives.
Well, Carlos, I'll say this on the FCC cybersecurity piece, we advocated for that and we were thrilled that it happened. I think the problem is that dollars have actually not gone out to the districts yet. And we now have a new chairman, and it is unclear to us that the chairman is going to send out those dollars, which would be a shame given how much effort you put into this and probably how much reliance your district has that these projects you're talking about were going to get funded. So we've actually been up. I was up at the FCC this morning. We were up at the FCC last week, and we have asked those questions. What is happening with those dollars? We have not gotten any answers back.
That's disappointing, but not a surprise given some of the other events that are taking place. Hopefully you will keep us posted, Carlos, if you actually receive those monies in district or not. Obviously, we need help to make this go forward. The community in education doesn't include just the educators and the school districts and students, but also includes a pretty vital, pretty robust cohort of technology companies that are geared specifically towards helping educators. With that audience, or with those stakeholders by your side, are there benefits? Are there opportunities to leverage those vendors in helping you with securing grant dollars? And are there pitfalls? So have you had success in using your vendor partners in this process? And is anybody experienced any dangers in using the vendor partners in this experience? And I guess I would go to you, Carlos, because you've had some success in writing these grants. Let's start with you. Talk about the vendor part of this equation.
Well, since I've been here for 22 plus years, we are lucky that we have built long-term relationships, partnerships with a lot of local vendors here in the El Paso area. A lot of them who bring specialized expertise, resources, and time to help us with our technology and safety initiatives. Many of them are extremely familiar with our network infrastructure, with physical layout of our buildings, and are extremely responsive to our needs. So, we developed those relationships throughout the years, and, I like to spread the wealth. So, every time we need something, we kind of publish an RFP based on those assessment needs and utilizing the rubric again, as far as the cybersecurity is concerned. And, and then we go from there. These vendors come out and they actually, most of them come out and do face-to-face meetings, walkthroughs. And so they really understand our needs. So we have not had any issues partnering up with vendors. The only concern I have is that over the years, we've also been moving toward the cloud-based systems. So recently, we had our cybersecurity incident where I'm sure you guys have heard of PowerSchool, the data breach that happened a couple of months ago, and where we happen to be one of their customers. So in those instances, we just have to be a little more aware of, the type of contracts that we have with them and get the assurance from those third-party vendors that they are actually protecting our data. Because, when it's cloud-based, it's pretty much all the data's out in the cloud. So it's really out of your control other than making sure that they are doing their due diligence in making sure that they do have their security in place.
I guess I could jump in and say, after having a 25 plus year career working as a chief technology officer, there's a delicate balance between not being what we call in Texas bamboozled by strategic partner relationships and doing the very best that you can to work on behalf of the school district and get the greatest amount of partnership and value. I think one of the things that I've always relied on and still do today is the networking opportunities. And I think strategic partners often join the same networks as, say, chief technology officers, ed tech leaders. For example, there's associations. I've mentioned COSIN, there's CETA, there's ASBO, and then there's state level organizations that represent the state within those national organizations. A lot of times there's user group meetings and association meetings where strategic partners and school district representatives and leaders get to come together, share best practices, share opportunities for the future. I think every edtech leader, CTO, CIO needs to be astute enough to understand what the value of their offerings are and what kind of advantages and value of investments they would bring to the district on a day-to-day basis in budgeting. And so I think there's a fine line between having a great strategic partner, either by association, networking, or maybe through a coalition. For example, we mentioned the Coalition for Cybersecurity and Education. There are some thoughtful partners that came together to try and solve the problem of cybersecurity. It was the number one issue for ed tech leaders and has been since about 2018. School districts are buried in the weeds. And so sometimes it takes a higher level of focus and vision to say, what can we do to help contribute and solve this problem? And I think that's the value of strategic partnerships.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all that. So NC Tech, as I said at the top, actually brings together industry leaders like Apple and Microsoft and Discovery and D2L, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a few, with, folks like NEA and NSBA and AA and the principals organizations and COAST and ISTE and CETA to have these conversations. The other thing I think that's also really useful is that they need educators too. They need educators to take a look at their products to make sure that they understand them. And it gives educators an opportunity, possibly while they're still in beta testing, to get their concerns out there and make sure that the products don't have some sort of significant fatal flaws. All of this, and maybe we'll get into this later, is critical because, they need to make sure they don't run afoul of things like privacy. And there are many bills that are in process right now to move on privacy. And also as a way to sort of make sure that the kinds of things that are going there are actually going to help students and teachers and not simply be, just more smoke than anything else. So, I think there has to be a partnership here. I've always thought that. And oftentimes what I hear from folks is our surprising bedfellows here, groups that you wouldn't expect would be working with companies, are there because they know they need to be there.
This is a really fun conversation. Let's shift a little bit now to real life examples. And I think, Frankie, you've mentioned one a couple of times, and I'd love for you to share a couple of insights as to, how did you create this? What are the things that were really key to making it work, and what were the risks, if you've had any that haven't worked in creating these?
Well, I hate to say I really haven't had any way that hasn't worked, but I think the key is to be extremely sharp and to invest in yourself and to put yourself in a position where, you're able to network. For example, Carlos and I met at the Texas Computer Education Association conference in Austin. He came to a workshop, and I was given a workshop on the cybersecurity rubric, and it was a 3-hour workshop. And if you're astute and really are committed to what you're doing as an education technology leader, and you're at an association conference with thousands of other leaders that are in the same realm of, I think, responsibility to ed tech as you are, then we tend to congregate. That's what works really well. And we're there. I think we may have even been there on a Saturday, in Austin, Texas, where there's a lot of fun things to be doing, but we probably wouldn't have gone anywhere else because it's that level of commitment. And Carlos came to the workshop, and immediately he shared his challenge being, like he shared with us, that he was with a small district. He was trying to do this very important cybersecurity initiative. And then he felt like he was being given a lot of additional responsibility. So he's a perfect case that fits most ed tech leaders, and that he was coming forth to the association to try to find like-minded people that could help network and share some of his responsibility. We then came up with the idea of starting a cybersecurity pilot grant, a working group within Texas to bring all of those that did receive the cybersecurity pilot funds. And what can we do to share our knowledge and come together and be able to work off of the best practices and the relationships that we're building together? So I think that's really the power of association, networking, and investing in yourself, to have the initiative to put yourself out there with strategic partners and learn from them, and learn also from other districts.
Can I put in a plug here, though, for educators to advocate as well? I mean, sounds like you have an immense amount on your plates already, but the fact is that the only way these dollars happen is when constituents go to their members of Congress and tell them this is important. You live in Texas. The chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee is Ted Cruz, your senator, and he has been at the forefront of actually being very skeptical of some of these investments. We need to turn him around, but we also need your House members as well to support funding for these things and the continuation of these things. So the stories that you are telling about what this means to you, how you struggle to get the money to do what you need to do, how you have to defer projects. And by the way, it's not just deferring projects, you're deferring access to really interesting things to students, right? So it's beyond just the sort of nuts and bolts of the project. These are the opportunities we are not going to be able to give to our students. The more you can make that case and go to Washington, either personally or virtually, so important.
I could agree with you more. And I myself have participated with TASBO, which is the Association for School Business Officials for Texas. Every year we have walked the Capitol and visited with representatives that were available to share our concerns about technology. Also, the Texas State Chapter for COSIM, the Texas Education Technology Leaders. Probably want to cut this out of the podcast, but I don't think there's any turning Ted Cruz around. I've been to his office to fight for E-rate funds. And so, we're up against some struggles in Texas. I'll leave it at that.
You have one more senator to work on. So, got another one.
I do agree with you. And advocacy is huge. I serve on COSIN's policy committee, and it's tremendous. There are some uphill challenges, but I have the confidence that we're here to stay. And it's just like you said, it's up to us to figure out very creative ways to turn this administration around.
John, you raise a point that I think is really valid, and it's threaded through many of your comments, that you have to tell your story, you have to be vocal, you have to talk about the successes, possibly failures, or the reasons why. Today's times are a little bit different, and there's a lot of uncertainty, as we've all talked about. What happens now? What changes between advocating federally and advocating at the state level, given the changing times that we're under? Do you have any different recommendations that you make given these current times?
Honestly, we're sort of dealing with everything in real time right now. And those are conversations that I'm now beginning to have with my clients and everywhere else, which is that in this world of uncertainty where you cannot necessarily rely on the federal government's word. So for instance, the FCC is proposing as of last week to eliminate Wi-Fi in school buses and Wi-Fi hotspots as eligible E-rate services. You know, there are folks who applied for those things. There are folks who are still waiting to receive money from 2024 for Wi-Fi and school buses. They have set aside money in their budgets. What's going to happen now there? They're going to either have to find other money, or they're going to have to default on contracts, breach contracts. And that's a real problem for everybody. So I think that two things. One, we have to try to keep what we have here at the federal government, knowing that we're not going to be able to grow the amount of money that's available for anything for the next couple of years, probably. But two, I think it's incumbent for every district to start looking to states and counties, or however your school districts are set up, and forcing them to come to grips with the fact that the federal government dollars may not always be there, or at least as much, and that they're going to need to step up in some way. And when you have those conversations, you're going to have to fight it out, right, with everybody else in the district who also want money for whatever their thing is. So you have to make sure that you make the case for technology. And that case, again, it's where we started. It's twofold. It's how does this help kids? How does this help us improve student learning as well as teaching? And then how is this helping prepare them for the future workforce and even for academia? And if you can make those points better than your colleagues who are going to be arguing for, I don't know, their art programs or their music programs or something else that's also very meritorious, then hopefully they'll be able to find some additional money for technology.
And, could I just add this, John? I agree with you 110% with that equation. To get your arms around how to tell that story with value, with quantitative or qualitative data is very challenging. And that's the nut that we're trying to crack. And sometimes it's easier to go back to a cybersecurity insurance premium or a health insurance premium to say those are dollars that you could show a true value on when it comes to increasing student confidence or collaboration or scores. Sometimes it's more difficult to quantify that. And I think that has been the challenge since the 90s, since the time that technology was introduced into the classroom.
I'm all for advocation, and I think it gets to the point where all those advocating and going out to the county commissioner, speaking in front of them, where all that's taking place, and you still don't see any results from that. Perfect example, post-COVID, the state of Texas started this high-speed bandwidth initiative and offered several grants. And the El Paso County Commissioners Court, they went ahead and sent out a memo of all these school districts in underserving communities that were interested in applying for. We all jumped in, Bavens ISD, San Isario ISD, Clinton ISD, Hancock ISD, all the, small school districts in the El Paso area. We all jumped in at that opportunity. We went through the whole network assessment. They were looking at the possibility of expanding the fiber infrastructure, because we don't have fiber out here except for the vendors that are already providing fiber. So they wanted these grants were to kind of connect the communities to the internet, to high-speed bandwidth, because hotspots post-COVID, they weren't working for us. They were just too slow. And, it's been how many years since COVID? Kind of lost track of time, but
5 years.
5 years now. And we still have not seen any regarding that project. The grants have stalled for so long to the point where we kind of already gave up on that, because there's just so much bureaucracy. They have to go through so many approvals and whatnot, and it's so frustrating because students need that connectivity now, not 10, 20 years from now. And so it's just unfortunate that we've already exhausted all those resources. Our superintendents, all 3 or from the school districts involved, were actively involved. They were attending the commissioner court meetings. They were advocating and at the county level, and we're also advocating at the state level. And, nothing came to fruition out of that. So it's just a never-ending challenge.
So just to keep the perspective of time here, we're going to have to, I would like to have everybody kind of give a little bit of a summary around, and we can start with you for this, Carlos. We've talked about advocating is important. We've talked about possibly, using vendor partners where possible and using data where possible. What else is there as a tool in the toolbox going forward? And I would throw one out around predictive analytics based upon activities and so on. Can we partner with vendors there to be able to say, hey, if we're able to do these things, we expect these results, and use that in the dynamic of data for some of these requests? Just an idea, but then if everybody could kind of chime in as well, that would be great.
Right. And part of that, the high speed bandwidth initiative, we did involve 2 or 3 different vendors who were willing to, bid on the project, and they came out here and did all these network assessment, site surveys, and, try to gauge the best signal strength to, every community, to cover the whole communities, and to kind of save costs and maybe do a collaborative, network with the neighboring school districts. And, so they were already a part of the that collaboration. And so I'm not so sure what else could have been done differently because it was already there. Yeah.
I think, Patrick, from a data analytics perspective, first thing that comes to mind is scrutinizing every cost that the technology budget and even at the district level is incurring. And is there any way to cut anywhere? And from a data analytics perspective, it is, in technology departments, there's a lot of shiny tools and softwares that have been purchased and they just become part of the baseline budget. And so I think one of the strengths of the data analytics is to be able to scrutinize every tool, every technology, every software that's being used to the very best of your ability as a leader to make certain that the value is there for that technology. How much is it used? If it is used, what value is it providing to the student, to the teacher, to the administrator? And if you can show that it's either not being used or it's not valuable, then if you're as a leader or putting that forward, an item that can be cut out of the budget, then that's a win-win. And so I think it's a mindset and it's an attitude that, as a leader, you're going to scrutinize through the tools that you have available, through data analytics, through all these other tools to say, is there anywhere for us to cut this budget so that we can provide more resources to our students, staff, teachers, to our facilities, whatever the needs are. And it more than that, it really shows that you're a leader that cares about how every dollar and every dime is spent. I can tell you in 25 years, I never had an item cut from my budget because strategically you can tie that back to your goals. You can tie that back to usage. You can tie that back to data analytics and present those types of budget items in a very, I think, executive level position that shows that you're really trying to do the very best job that you can. You've done your homework.
I think that starving our kids of funding for technology and connectivity is going to reap the wrong dividends, and that policymakers need to understand that. And the more we can show them that these kids need this kind of access, need these skills, need to be able to handle technology and connectivity and AI, or else they're not going to be successful in the future workforce. The more we can make that case, the better off we're going to be. We don't want them coming out of school and walking into a modern office place and not be able to function. Right. They won't get the job probably in the first place.
Yeah, they won't get a job.
So let me just say, I appreciate very much, Carlos and Frankie, your struggles to try to do the right thing and get the right tools into those kids' hands and to save money where you can and keep at it. It's a struggle for everybody, but we're going to keep trying to get you the resources you need from here, but you're also going to need to work on that at the state and local levels.
I agree. Thank you, John, for reminding us of that. That's very important.
Well, great. So we've had a wonderful conversation here. We've had a whole lot of really good examples of people that care, their diligence, and their focus on what we want to do. I think there's a couple of takeaways here. Value is important. It's always important to show value. I think with today's times, it's especially important to show value in a fashion that's reflected in the audience that's hearing it. And so in the past, we've always talked about learning and accomplishments of the students, but now we also need to add in the metrics of, are they prepared to use new technologies going forward like AI, and are they prepared to enter the workforce and contribute immediately? So those measurements are changing, and we need to make sure we're showing value in terms of the right measurements. The uncertainty makes the problem more difficult. It certainly is a challenge. We can use our partners and other stakeholders in this community, whether they're vendors, whether they're neighboring districts, and we certainly want to do that. There are sometimes risks that are associated, and we can talk about one of the major breaches recently with Power School. That adds complexity again to this, adds the burden, and the small districts are particularly overburdened by the challenges that we're talking about here. But data is very important, but it's also important about how we associate with that data. And working with associations, working with like-minded people, gathering so that we can advocate and advocate together in a stronger, unified voice, all will make this challenge and the ability to share the data that we can demonstrate all the more powerful. But we always have to start with facts. Facts are better. Even though a lot of the things seem emotional that are going on today, facts are always better than not having facts. So scrub every little tool that you can, scrub every little corner that you can to make sure that the data you're bringing forward is factual and strong, and stay the course. This is not an easy task. It continues to get more difficult, but it takes passionate people like you to make the difference. And so I applaud all of you for your efforts. I thank you for this wonderful conversation. And did I miss anything? Anybody have any other comments there?
No, you said it very well, Patrick.
Well,
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much for being here. We hope you'll come and join us again when we have wonderful stories of success, even more stories of success to share.
Right.
Thank you.
Everybody listening, thank you. We look forward to seeing you next time on Perspectives Finding Common Ground.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.